William Afton, the man behind the slaughter, who is arguably the most infamous character from the Five Nights at Freddy's franchise. But with this character we still have tons of mysteries that I've explored in different videos throughout this channel. I've tried to solve topics like where Ultimate Custom Night takes place, where William is being tortured, how many souls are actually in Ultimate Custom Night, and his role and secret of the Mimic that connects to other FNAF games. So in this video, not only am I going to combine my past theories on William Afton making one long video, but I'm also going to add additional commentary and evidence based on your comments and feedbacks that I think make these theories much stronger. So my name is Bronze Films, and join me as I cover why Ultimate Custom Night takes place in this arcade machine, why all 50 characters in UCN are actually individual souls torturing William, and finally why William was in Murray's costume manor during Secret of the Mimic stalking us and the Mimic. Oh, and because most theories have a cool name attached with it, of course I have to do the same, starting with what I'm calling WillCade, and no, not WillCare. But first, I am happy to announce that we now officially have a G Fuel discount code. This just wouldn't have been possible without your guys' support, so use code BRONZEFILMS for 20% off orders or click the link in the description, and thank you all so much for the support. How is William Afton possessing an arcade machine in Security Breach? Well, to find out, let's look at the latest FNAF book in the franchise. But for a disclaimer, by no means did I come up with this theory, nor am I the first. This is an ongoing thought as more games have been released. The FNAF franchise is made up of different forms of content with lore and mystery for the community to attempt to solve. And this week, an addition was just made to one of those forms of content, the latest book, Five Nights at Freddy's Ticket to Fun. Now this thing has a ton, and I mean a ton of lore that finally tells us more about characters, pizzerias, and even about the missing children incident, and maybe how there should have been one more child involved. So you could really make an entire video on each of these topics, but I want to focus on a small part of this book that not only connects to the old FNAF games, but it might be the key to understanding parts of the modern lore and timeline. So my name is Bronze Films, and join me as I cover how FNAF Ticket to Fun solves William Afton and how his soul has been possessing an arcade machine this entire time. But for a quick disclaimer, this video will contain spoilers for Five Nights at Freddy's Ticket to Fun, so if you'd rather wait until you check out the book for yourself, swipe away from this video and come back when you're done. Ticket to Fun was released a few days ago, and it gives us an in-universe experience from fans and employees of the animatronics, restaurants, into parts of the lore that have never been explored before. We learn things like that there was a failed MCI victim based on a letter from a fan named Timmy, who was lured into a dark closet by Bonnie for a special prize but had to leave to open his presents. Or that children have most likely seen Golden Freddy based on the hidden section of the crossword puzzle. Using a UV light, we see the message, "I saw another Freddy," with a hidden word reading, Golden. And we also got confirmation to a popular theory that I'm going to relate to William Afton, Arcade Theory. Gibby Horror Homestead is someone who needs no introduction. I'm sure many of you have seen this almost 9-hour long video or some of their theories in FNAF discussion videos. And you probably also heard of Arcade Theory, a theory saying that the arcade machines in the FNAF games are haunted or possessed the exact same way the animatronics are. The ghosts are connected to the machines, and the human characters in the FNAF world can actually play them. So for example, the reason at the end of FNAF 6 we have images from the minigames is because these are real in-universe diegetic games that the characters could see. You can watch this amazing video to get the full context, so of course all credit to this theory goes to Gibby. So when looking at Ticket to Fun, we first get this paragraph titled "All Work, No Play," and it reads, "If any of the game cabinets turn on during the course of the night, please immediately shut them down to conserve power. If the game does not shut down even if unplugged, immediately return to your post. Ignore any messages that may appear on the screens. This is a known glitch with no current fix. Employees found playing arcade games while on the clock will be immediately terminated either by us or by the animatronics they didn't hear coming." I mean, arcade machines turning on even after being unplugged and displaying messages just screams possessed, and messages could include "it's me" or even "save them." It doesn't really get clearer than arcades staying on, but for more evidence we have this image of Charlie from the Security Puppet minigame. The only way Fazbear's Entertainment would be able to obtain this image of 8-bit Charlie is if the minigame actually existed in the context of the story. Now it's up to debate if this is telling us that Charlie is possessing an arcade machine or that this is some sort of remnant manifestation, which could be why it's only visible under the UV light. We also get images of cars from Midnight Motorist that can also only be seen under UV, possibly meaning that the Midnight Motorist arcade machine is possessed and that the characters from FNAF have played this minigame. It's even mentioned as one of Timmy's favorite arcade machines in the paragraph I mentioned earlier. So these few short images and paragraphs tell us that the idea of souls possessing arcade machines is possible, which is exactly what I think is happening later in the FNAF timeline. I think that William's soul is possessing this Balloon Boy arcade machine, either voluntary or involuntary, which then allowed him to return as Burntrap. Now I know that sounds a bit random, so going down the list of evidence, during PAX West 2024 and outside of the Secret of the Mimic demo, fans could play an arcade version of FNAF Ultimate Custom Night, with Dako even recreating his infamous 50/20 mode celebration. Now sure, this could just be something Stu will put out for fans to enjoy while waiting in line, but it could also easily include
Lord chew on.
Where UCN takes place has always been up for discussion, whether that be a purgatory, a nightmare, or even in a different dimension. But what if this was a way to tell us that William's soul was trapped inside of an arcade machine by the vengeful spirit? Meaning someone else inside the FNAF world could have found this arcade machine and found a way to get William out of the game. Shout out to this comment who reminded me the arcade machine was at the demo, so I think it makes the most sense that Vanessa was the one who found this machine. Which brings us to the modern lore of the timeline. Down in the sinkhole and in the FNAF 6 room where Burntrap is, we find evidence of Vanny living down there while Burntrap, you could say, was still cooking. We find the Vanny logo spray painted on the wall, a bed, blankets, newspapers, and food, all scattered around this area. We even find tally marks for probably each day she stayed down there in the sinkhole. Most importantly, we also find this Balloon World arcade machine with the screen glitching in and out. This is where I think William was being held captive. This is the arcade machine that I think William's soul is possessing. When playing the arcade machine, you play as Balloon Boy, trying to avoid different obstacles between a night and day setting. Occasionally, a small purple glitch effect will appear on screen. If the player reaches it quick enough, the minigame will have a glitch purple look to it. And if you follow the outline of the glitch terrain, you can continue the minigame until you reach the very end, and enlarge eclipse behind Balloon Boy with the message, "Good night." Now this minigame also screams possessed to me, or that something supernatural is happening here. This small purple glitch effect could even be a glimpse to William's soul itself, and that the entire screen going purple is how William's soul is possessing this arcade machine. The same way something would go wrong with other minigames like in Security Puppet where Charlie's locked outside, and this has already basically been proven to be possession. The carnival setting of the arcade could also be a reference to Fall Fest, which at this point is an infamous event in the FNAF franchise that has finally been expanded on in Secret of the Mimic. This new game suggested that the Fall Fest fire, which most likely took place between the year 1970 to 1979, was responsible for the death of Fiona Murray, wife of Edwin Murray, who both owned Murray's Costume Manor, a contracting business for Fazbear's Entertainment. This side of FNAF has its own insane lore that I'm sure you've seen be discussed by now, but the Fall Fest fire that has been teased since the very first Help Wanted game was probably caused by William Afton. You can watch this video to see why I think that's the case, so the Dark Force and Eclipse being here could be a way to represent the fire, or I could be reaching at nothing. But this arcade machine is a good way to explain where William was in the context of the story that allowed him to return. However you want to look at it, if William was trapped inside this arcade by the vengeful spear, or if he found a way to preserve his life with this arcade game, this can tell us where William's soul was between FNAF 6 to Security Breach. The arcade machine even being there was always an odd detail to me. Vanny doesn't strike me as someone who would play arcade machines on her downtime while something like this is happening, so now we can say it was for a much greater reason. Another interesting detail is that we can find the exact same Balloon World arcade machine in the daycare center secret room. Now who was in this room is also up for debate, with some saying it was Gregory, Cassie, or even the Mimic. But whoever this is, maybe the Balloon World arcade machines act very similar to the Princess Quest arcades, where it's almost like a hive mind that was shared between the arcades, as you had to beat every single one to stop the glitch trap virus. So maybe whoever was in this room had this specific arcade here because they wanted to either stop or free William's soul from this arcade. And maybe that's the reason we see the exact same arcade in these two areas. Vanny would find a way to extract his essence or soul and would throw it into the Burntrap endoskeleton or into the new corpse we see wrapped around the suit. That's why in an almost Frankenstein moment, we see Burntrap emerge from the charging station as William is given a new life. This could also explain why Vanny was in the sinkhole for so long. All the tally marks are a day of experimenting and trying to get William out of the arcade machine and into a new corpse. We could even take this a step further and relate it to what Scott Cawthon said about Burntrap and Security Breach.
And I can give you a really easy example for this. And I'm hesitant to say this because I don't like messing with the lore, but I think in this case it's okay. When it comes to Burntrap, originally Burntrap was never supposed to move. He was supposed to just be something you saw in the corners, or like if you were walking past machinery, you might be able to peek in between two things and see him in the corner or propped up against a wall, almost like a some kind of decaying movie prop, and you never fully understood what his purpose was. And he had a very specific purpose, and I'm not going to say what that purpose was, but realistically, he never moved. Well, obviously that's not what we got in Security Breach. In Security Breach we got a capsule opening and purple smoke flowing out and him climbing out and coming to get you. And so it's just not quite the same thing. So but anyway,
I've already made a whole video on what Scott Cawthon said about Burntrap, but I also think we could relate it to arcade theory. Similar to how images of Charlie would manifest into the Ticket to Fun pages, what if this is a manifestation of William's soul? The reason he doesn't move is because he's not actually there, acting like a decaying movie prop. Maybe Scott Cawthon gave Stewart the idea of William being trapped inside of an arcade machine, but Stewart took it in a different way that Scott had visioned. However, now I'm just throwing some ideas out there. But addressing the elephant in the room, this can't be a video on the modern FNAF lore if it doesn't mention the Mimic, the franchise's latest antagonist that we finally got a backstory to in Secret of the Mimic. Which is why it's still being debated if the Mimic was planned since the very start and that the lore was supposed to move on from the Afton family. It can even be argued that Burntrap is actually the Mimic, and it's a possibility I went over in one of my latest theories. When working on this theory, it was mainly under the assumption that William was meant to come back and that he is Burntrap, but by no means is any of this confirmed. Especially when there's plenty of evidence saying that the Mimic is Burntrap and even Glitchtrap, which is why I want to emphasize this video is just a theory. Although Ticket to Fun did honestly confirm arcade theory in my opinion, it doesn't automatically mean William is in the arcade machine. Especially since if anything you could argue that the Glitchtrap virus is instead William and that he would be inside of the Princess Quest arcade machines. Although I personally believe that the Mimic is the Glitchtrap virus and the Mimic and William Afton were both around at the same time just in different ways, it could go either way and nothing is really confirmed. But with this latest FNAF book saying that it is possible for souls to possess arcade machines, I am simply throwing out the idea that this is what happened with William in the modern FNAF lore. I definitely think this book is trying to tell us about Midnight Motorist and that there's more happening with this minigame. But that's a topic for another video and I'm excited to see people tackle this minigame once again. Future Bronze here. With that said, now let's look at additional evidence for WillCade based on your comments. And now UCN taking place in an arcade machine could explain other features with this game that correlate with arcades, like the coins and different collectibles you collect, or like the fact that there are high scores in game modes. These would be high scores and game modes that exist within the FNAF universe, so it could also explain Old Man Consequences. Old Man Consequences first made his appearance in FNAF World as a minor character. He was featured in a secret ending where the player would reach the end of the map and encounter this character fishing alone. He only has 2 pieces of dialogue as all he says is, "I'm sorry to say that you have gone too deep into the code, there's no way back out." He also says, "My name is Old Man Consequences, come have a seat and let's fish for a while, you have nowhere else to go." He then made his next appearance in FNAF Ultimate Custom Night. To get this Easter egg, the player must set all animatronics to a rating of 0 and only keep Old Man Consequences at 1. Then when you're in the game and when you press a button to catch the fish, you will then be taken to the Easter egg. Here you get the exact same screen as the one in FNAF World, but this time Old Man Consequences has very cryptic and confusing dialogue. He first says, "Come and sit with me a while." He then says, "Leave the demon to his demons, rest your own soul." There is nothing else. After this, the player then walks into the lake, drowning themselves, and this is when the Easter egg ends. So there could be a couple of possibilities, like what if OMC is an arcade character or a machine itself that the eventual spirit travels to when they have a conversation with them? The reason Old Man Consequences is seen in this 8-bit minigame format is because it takes place in an arcade machine. This could also connect to FNAF World, where for the longest time it's been believed that the entirety of this game takes place in an arcade machine as well. So because Old Man Consequences appears in both these games, he's actually appearing in 2 different arcade machines that once again exist in universe. Now a lot of people argue that this arcade machine was actually tied in with Gregory, which is possible, but I think there's just as much of a chance that it's actually tied to William. But this is just a theory. So now we can look at what I'm calling the UCN50, where there are actually 50 souls torturing William Afton and not just one as the vengeful spirit. Five Nights at Freddy's Secret of the Mimic just solved Ultimate Custom Night and its biggest mysteries. Mysteries that can finally help us understand characters like William Afton and how it's all connected to the modern lore and timeline. By now I'm sure many of you have seen amazing theories on Secret of the Mimic and on Edwin Murray's deceased son, David. Like theories by T-Dreads and Fazbear's Entertainment on God David, a theory by Flipside on Midnight Motorist and how David might be at the center of it all, and a theory by The Unwithered Truth on Ultimate Custom Night that I want to expand on today in this video. UCN is a game that divides the fandom in multiple aspects and is one of the more interesting games as there's a ton of unsolved and hidden mysteries. But now with Secret of the Mimic, I believe this newest game has finally provided us with some answers. But first I recommend checking out all these videos by these talented creators as they can fundamentally change what we know about the franchise. So my name is Bronze Films and let's go over how Secret of the Mimic tells us that there are dozens of souls torturing William Afton in Ultimate Custom Night. Starting with what we know about a new tragedy, Fall Fest.
What are you waiting for?
In order to truly cover Fall Fest, let's go back to the very start when it was first introduced. In the Help Wanted Dreadbreed DLC, we learn that this DLC takes place within the actual Fall Fest Carnival, as the game's hub contains a banner advertising Fall Fest 1983, an important year for the franchise. We then saw a poster for Fall Fest 1970 revealed in the Help Wanted 2 game hub, as we can also assume that the carousel minigame focusing around Moon where you have to fix the carousel while avoiding him, and the Carney minigame where you shoot at targets with a phaser blast for points, both took place in the Fall Fest Carnival itself, itself, and up to this point we would only get more references and Easter eggs to this carnival. In Security Breach we found this arcade machine of Balloon Boy which took place in a carnival, this poster advertising Fredbear's singing show. In Ruin we saw these carnival animal mascot suits, and even the Mimic wore a carnival lion suit in the Scooper ending. And now finally, with the release of Five Nights at Freddy's Secret of the Mimic, we now have concrete information on the Fall Fest Carnival, how it's connected to Fazbear's, and its eventual downfall, which I think is the big mystery we can connect to Ultimate Custom Night into this purgatory. Secret of the Mimic is centered around MCM, Murray's Costume Manor, a contracting business owned by Edwin that would create mascot suits and technology for companies and events. One of these companies was of course Fazbear's Entertainment, who commissioned various projects like Chica's Party World. This is the first project we hear of them working together on, a location we've known almost nothing about before this point. Here in a text log we learn that a client or Fazbear's is very happy with the design, and that Chica's design came from Fiona, Edwin Murray's wife. And of course we learn that MCM was commissioned to work on Fall Fest. We find the same Fall Fest 1970 poster from Help Wanted 2 alongside collectibles from the actual carnival. We find a snow globe from Fall Fest that looks similar to promotional art for the event featuring animatronics and even the puppet as a scarecrow. We even find an admissions ticket for Fall Fest, a ticket with the same colors from the poster and something we've never really seen before. And like I mentioned, it's assumed we already saw two exact attractions from Fall Fest 1970 and Help Wanted 2, meaning there was a Phaser Blast type of attraction that included the Carney animatronic that could have possibly been created by Edwin for Fazbear's, which could also mean that the other Rockstar animatronics were also part of the MCM catalog, which is why we see him show up once more in FNAF Pizzeria Simulator. And I think we can say the exact same thing about the Carousel minigame, as we know Moon was also created by Edwin. But most importantly, we learned that Edwin's wife Fiona decided to go to Fall Fest with the installation team because she felt that something was wrong.
Ed, I hope this message reaches you as soon as you get a break. I have to go help the Fall Fest crew, just for a few days until the installation is finished. It's hard to explain. I just have this terrible feeling like I need to be there so nothing goes wrong. Just in case. Trisha will babysit David while I'm gone. I love you both, and I'll be back next week.
This trip was supposed to last a week, but as we learn in another voice log, Fiona never returns and Edwin is forced to raise David completely on his own.
Oh, why did you go? You weren't even supposed to be there. You were supposed to be here with me and David. Oh, how am I supposed to tell David that his mother is gone? How am I supposed to raise a kid on my own? His life is ruined. My life is ruined.
But how and why? How did Fiona die at Fall Fest? Well, to find out, the first thing we know for almost certain is that it was a fire that killed her. The 1970s Fall Fest fire, a fire I'll mention again later on when talking about UCN. In both Help Wanted 2 Fall Fest minigames, both of them end with a secret level where the attraction catches fire. With the carousel minigame, you face Jacko Moon while fixing the carousel once more, but in the middle of the minigame, a fire will randomly start engulfing the attraction and move slowly. With the Carney minigames focused on FNAF 2, after completing the level like normal, the arm of the cardboard cutout of Dreadbear will snap off, causing electrical sparks to go flying, which will also cause a fire. The fire will spread across the wagons and even to Carney himself, which will end the minigame. And in the Five Nights at Freddy's 3 Phaser Blast level, we then see the aftermath of the fire while defending yourself against Springtrap. You'll find the wagons and even Carney completely burned with nothing in the attraction left. So it appears that a fire brought down Fall Fest, meaning we can assume it's what killed Fiona, and we almost know for certain who caused this fire, the franchise's most infamous killer, William Afton. Throughout this game, we learn how William Afton was slowly sabotaging Edwin's business and slowly taking over his own company. Through audio and text logs, we learn how William was in contact with a leak from MCM who gave him the contact information of all the employees of the company. And we also know some employees sold Edwin's work to most likely William.
Attention traders, admin wing permissions have been revoked. And no, you can't clear out your desks. You stole my work. Now your jackets, purses, and coffee mugs, and anything else belongs to me. Maybe I'll go find someone to sell your stuff to. How does that feel?
We also learned that William and Fazbear's Entertainment kept delaying a project that Edwin was working on for them, the prototype FNAF 1 location. In the research and development area, we can find the prototype FNAF 1 pizzeria that has the exact same hallways, offices, and stage. Of course, there are also the prototype animatronics of Freddy, Bonnie, Foxy, and Chica, alongside the FNAF 1 endoskeletons. So after delaying the project over and over, Edwin would lose his friends, money, and after the death of his family, he would finally lose his company and everything he's built.
I feel stupid recording this, but I just hope somehow that you can still hear me. I can't do this alone. The change orders are killing me. Our employees, my friends, they keep leaving. The money's gone. I just need to finish the new Fazbear project, and then everyone will come back. We can get back to normal. I miss my friends. Our friends. I miss you. I miss you more than you'll ever know.
And clearly William is successful in taking over Edwin's life, so what if, to make sure that Edwin's life would crumble and he would lose everything, what if William killed Fiona with the Fall Fest fire? I think the first major piece of evidence is the carousel minigame. In the Jacko Moon level, when looking from the outside perspective, we actually see that the fire started in this barn, and that it then spread to the rest of the attraction. So what if William was inside that barn? He would start the fire where no one would be able to see him and would then disappear. Fiona would be somewhere else in the carnival helping the installation team and most likely didn't know a fire started until it was too late. And it appears that moon.exe actually confirms this. As I'm sure many of you know by now, moon.exe is a minigame accessible through the helper terminals and acts as a way to tell a story about the Murrays. There's a ton to go over in moon.exe, but most importantly you run into Sun, who we can confidently say is meant to represent Fiona, who is described as the old woman inside of the rundown cabin in the woods. We know this for certain as we face the F10 and 4 program, which is the name of the AI also known as M1, a program created by Edwin to babysit David. So when this program or Fiona begins to talk to us, the monitors behind the computer display the exact same icon of Sun from moon.exe, which is most likely saying that they are one and the same and can be used to represent one another. And when looking back to the minigame, we find statues that are clearly supposed to represent Edwin and Fiona, but Fiona's statue is burnt with the Fall Fest globe collectible that I mentioned earlier right in front of it, which could imply that this statue or Fiona was burnt by a fire that occurred in this event in the snow globe, Fall Fest. And on top of that, you can also find a seamstress building that was burnt to the ground, another way to show Fiona was in that fire, as we know she loves sewing together hand puppets, like the Foxy Crew hand puppets we see in the theater. And finally, when facing Big Top and handing him the Fall Fest admissions ticket that I mentioned earlier, he says, "This is the one. This is where Sun left, leaving them behind." I think it's obvious that this is yet another way how the game is telling us how she died. The one is the Fall Fest Carnival where Sun or Fiona would leave to but would never return from. And for one final piece of evidence, in the Carnage minigame that I mentioned earlier, in the final level, the only thing we see left after the fire is Spring Shop or William Afton, which could be a way to tell us that he's the only thing that remained and stayed alive after the fire, since he caused it and was able to escape. But enough about Fall Fest, now we can finally take a look at William Afton's personal hell.
Although for one of you, the darkest pit of hell has opened to swallow you whole, so don't keep the devil waiting, old friend.
Five Nights at Freddy's Ultimate Custom Night really needs no introduction. It's William Afton being tortured for eternity by the one you should not have killed. Who this is a controversial debate on its own, with some believing it's the Crying Child, Cassidy, Andrew, and in the Unwithered Truth theory, he even suggested it could be David, Edwin's deceased son from Secret of the Mimic. Now for the sake of this theory and because I love that video, we are going to say it's David, and like I mentioned earlier, I'm proposing that David isn't alone in holding William in this purgatory. Not only is there 1, 5, or even 10 other souls, but I think we can go as far to say that all 50 selectable characters represent a soul tormenting William. Now before you click off the video, hear me out as I go through a surprisingly decent amount of evidence. It's already been theorized that there are other souls in UCN based on voice lines that make it seem like the one you should not have killed isn't alone. So because of this, I decided to go back and to listen to every single voice line of every single animatronic. And I found that there are at least 15 different voice lines from different characters that indicate other souls are aware of where they are and what they are doing. They also just aren't the one you should not have killed speaking through them like with the mediocre melodies. They're completely separate souls who would want to torture William. Take a listen to these voice lines from Withered Bonnie and Ballora.
What is this new prison? Is it me trapped or is it you? Perhaps it's us both.
These are strange circumstances that have brought us together.
Withered Bonnie's line implies that even he doesn't know how he ended up here and that it might have even been against his will, something I'll touch more on soon. With Ballora, once again she is aware of the circumstances, and this feels like someone new speaking, who may have also known William at one point. Now take a listen to these voice lines from Nightmare Balloon Boy and Rockstar Bonnie.
There just isn't room in here for both of us.
So good to see you again, my truest friend. But now your life must end.
With Nightmare Balloon Boy, we once more see the reassuring idea of there being someone else here with William, as he is even being tortured by these same nightmares he would force test subjects to go through. With Rockstar Bonnie, whoever soul this is was true friends with William at one point when they're both presumably alive, which brings me to the core of this theory. William Afton has had much more victims than any of us could have anticipated. More than the souls of Charlie Emily, possibly David Murray, souls of the missing children incident, or even the dead children incident. We're talking about dozens of victims, and I think most of them came from one place, Fall Fest. Like I said, if William was responsible for murdering Fiona in a fire, to me it's hard to believe that she would be the only victim or casualty. Especially since in Help Wanted 2, it seems that we are playing these games while they're active and while the park would be open. So when this fire would randomly start in a barn and would spread to attractions, this would all happen when Fall Fest is actively open. Meaning there would be Fiona's installation team, employees of Fall Fest, and families, all most likely caught in this fire and became William Afton's casualties. They would all then become vengeful spirits with the perfect place for a reunion where they could all get revenge, being William Afton's purgatory or nightmare fueled by agony, depending on what you believe in. When looking back to the voice lines, now take a listen to these lines by Orville and Rockstar Foxy while keeping the Fall Fest fire in mind.
He tried to release you. He tried to release us. But I'm not gonna let that happen. I will hold you here. I will keep you here. No matter how many times they burn us.
Yarg, ye play with fire, and sometimes ye get burned.
With Foxy, obviously we get a reference to a fire, which I know is something broad, but we can't connect this Rockstar to Carney, who was in the Fall Fest fire and is technically a Rockstar animatronic as well. But this line about a fire is just the beginning. With Orville, he is definitely referring to Henry Emily, who tried to free William and the other souls in animatronics in Pizzeria Simulator. But of course, the one you should not have killed stops this and is speaking through Orville. But at the end of the line, he says, no matter how many times they burn us, that's right, multiple souls. Sure, this could be referring to the other souls in FFPS like Charlie or Elizabeth, but that game suggests they were able to move on and that every soul in that game moved on besides William. In a way, all remaining souls had their happiest day. But victims from Fall Fest wouldn't be able to move on, especially since it seemed like they were never mentioned anywhere else in the timeline. So they could be the other souls Orville is referencing to holding William back. Now take a listen to lines that are at this point infamous voice lines from Jacko Chica. With the first line, Jacko Chica could clearly act as a reminder of the Fall Fest fire and his actions of burning innocent people. With the next line, we again hear from the one you should not have killed, but this time he isn't speaking through Jacko Chica. Chica just mentions him as she greets William from the quote-unquote fire, maybe the Fall Fest fire. If this were to really be the case, then I think we can even say that this is Fiona's vengeful spirit itself. We know in a way Fiona was responsible for creating Chica and Chica's party world, so is it really that far-fetched to say that this is a way to represent her? Sure, we mostly saw her through the Sun characters and through the puppets, but these are her creations just like Chica. That's why Fiona's greeting William from the fire, since that's where she was murdered. This could mean that this is a mother and son duo torturing William in this nightmare, which is kinda wholesome in a way. Aww. But to really just throw an idea out there, let's take a listen and look at the character of Nightmare Freddy.
I am given flesh to be your tormentor.
Here this line implies that David could have given these vengeful souls quote-unquote flesh and new identities as animatronics from William Afton's past. That's why we see Scraptrap and Springtrap. They obviously aren't actually William, but different souls given his identity to almost mock him and his failures. And this next line only supports this even further.
I am remade, but not by you, by the one you should not have killed.
This is clear confirmation that the one you should not have killed is rebuilding these animatronics for this nightmare, and again, I think it's also to pair an animatronic with each soul. Also take a look at Nightmare Freddy's icon when selecting characters. We see Freddy in the back with the Freddles in front of him. Looks normal, right? But to me it looks like a dad posing for a picture with his 3 children. Okay, whoa, I know that seems crazy and just wrong, and I could definitely be looking too deep into things just like Mr. Hippo says.
Maybe it doesn't mean anything at all. Maybe it doesn't mean anything at all.
But in context of Fall Fest, it could make a lot of sense. Like I said earlier, if it really was open when this fire occurred, then of course there would be families like a dad and his kids. If they also got caught up in this fire and became casualties of William Afton, then it could make sense they would become vengeful spirits that would return in the form of Nightmare Freddy and his Freddles. But really this is just speculative, and I admit it doesn't have the strongest evidence towards it. Also, because this is William Afton's personal nightmare, we of course see artifacts from his life, like posters from different pizzerias, a recreation of a room from his house he most likely used only for experiments, and we can actually find a reference to Fall Fest. In Pizzeria Simulator, we were introduced to this Spookfest poster, which at the time didn't have a meaning to, nor could we connect it to anything. But then in the Help Wanted and in the Dreadbreak DLC I've talked about all video, we saw this poster return in this barn, which to me is saying that Fall Fest and Spookfest are one and the same, different names for the same event. But we also saw this variation of a Fall Fest poster in Ultimate Custom Night and in one of the hallways. If everything around him is supposed to be a reminder of his misdeeds, then this poster would be perfect. It's where he would take dozens of lives as casualties, and having to stare at this poster over and over while being tormented by his own creations seems like a fitting end for this character. Although if we're saying the majority of these souls came from Fall Fest, there is still a chance that there are some souls we're familiar with. Unwithered Truth already brought up a lot of great evidence to why the crying child could possibly be represented through Nightmare Fredbear, and why he would even need to torture William. So if this really is a reunion, I do believe CC could be a part of this group. Or instead of them directly being in Afton's nightmare, it could also relate to memories. Now I know earlier I said that victims of the MCI or Charlie Emily most likely have moved on, which I still believe is true, so what if it's the agony of their memories which is making them return? We know memories have had a crucial component in the franchise, and especially with these newer games like in FNAF Help Wanted 2. That's why we have two puppets and two different Charlies, two sets of memories both caused by William, which could also be why they sound very different.
Seeing you powerless is like music to me. There is room for one more.
We could also apply the same reasoning to the victims of the Fall Fest fire, where it's the mix of the agony of their memories being in that fire that created this nightmare or purgatory for William. But I still personally like the idea more that it's their actual souls finally getting revenge with the help of David and even possibly Fiona. Now I don't know if this was all just a group chat created by David or something like that, since I don't really have a reasonable explanation to how they would all come together in one single place. But what I do know for certain is that it's all just a theory.
A game theory.
By no means am I saying that anything in this video is confirmed or that it should be taken as canon, especially since we actually don't know anything about the Fall Fest fire. Yes, we finally got some information about it in Secret of the Mimic and how it's connected to Fiona and her death. But besides that, who caused it, why, and if there were any other casualties could simply go any other way. I also understand the criticism of even using Secret of the Mimic to solve parts of the earlier story, as when these games were released, we can assume that Scott didn't have the Mimic and this new family planned all the way down the line. Instead, I think it was just ideas Scott had that were fleshed out games later and would then be connected back to the original games, which is why I think multiple souls in UCN would even work. So just take all of this as speculation, and again, it's just a theory. Future Bronze here again. With the UCN50 Theory, I'm really happy with how things turned out, but based on the comments, things I want to bring up is why Fiona even went to Fall Fest and if William really caused the fire. Based on the voice logs, we know Fiona only went with the Fall Fest crew because of a bad feeling, so is there more to it? Well, some theories suggest that Fiona was being blackmailed by William in order to get her there. Fiona could have been catching on to William's plan to take over MCM, so William could have threatened her to get her to Fall Fest where he would have started the fire. Another option is that some spirit or soul had a role, either through them communicating with her or manipulating her into going. But who the soul would be is harder to decipher. With the fire itself, of course, another popular theory is that Edwin caused it, just accidentally. Because Edwin would be rushing his inventions, the one that would be used in Fall Fest would malfunction, causing a fire which would then kill Fiona. Edwin would be aware of this, and this grief could just be more reason that he would want to create M1. He's trying to bring back his wife that he was responsible for losing. But like the theory itself, this is just speculation, and I think if we were to get some sort of Fall Fest project, we could finally learn everything we need to know about it. But finally, moving on to what I'm calling WillSilhouette. I know, so creative. Let's look at this silhouette from FNAF Secret of the Mimic. On September 16th, the first patch update was released for the latest FNAF project, Five Nights at Freddy's Secret of the Mimic. As expected, it included bug fixes and things you would usually expect with this sort of update, but what none of us expected was for this update to include a lore, and I mean the type of lore that inspired me to create this entire video. A silhouette in the distance of Murray's costume manor that I think is the most infamous villain from the franchise. This update is what I think broke the FNAF timeline, and I'm going to try to fix it. So, my name is Bronze Films, and join me as I cover why William Afton knew about Remnant since 1979, how he learned to stuff bodies into suits from the Mimic, and why he might have even been in possession of the mimic this entire time. So please consider hitting that like and subscribe button as we go over how this update is the start to solving the earlier games and their timeline. Like I mentioned, at the very beginning of the game, you find this office where Dispatch talks to you, and across from you, you'll find this window with the silhouette moving and watching you. Now your first thought might be that it's just Digityper, but the issue here is that this silhouette is still here even after Jackie throws Digityper into this wall. And why would Steelwool add a dedicated silhouette that is always watching us just for it to be Digityper? Another popular theory suggests that it's Edwin, who is actually alive unlike the game suggests, here to fix his mistakes and to retrieve the mimic. It could also just be anything related to Edwin, like his ghost that is possessing Mary's costume manor. Although it seems something like this is the case, for reasons I'll mention later in the video, I still don't think it's Edwin. I believe that this silhouette is none other than William Afton, here to retrieve what he believes is his and to discover mysteries along the way. Right off the bat, the reason William Afton was even represented as Purple Guy wasn't because he was literally purple, but because he acted as a shadowy evil figure. He was the shadow that we saw in the earlier FNAF games, like in the FNAF 2 Foxy minigame or in the Give Cake minigame when Purple Guy murders Charlie. That's why in Midnight Motorist, we see his color palette as yellow, the opposite of purple since he is no longer in the shadows throughout the minigame. It can even be argued that he has a shadow-like presence over MCM, as he slowly takes over Edwin's business, characters, and even his home, which I'll return to later. Every time we see William Afton, he's represented as the shadow, so why wouldn't this apply to Secret of the Mimic? But if we really are saying this is William Afton, why? Well, I think the main reason is to retrieve the mimic himself. At this point, you could find 7 different bodies inside MCM scattered around different areas or rooms. These are 7 different people from teams who have all failed to retrieve the mimic schematics, with there even being text logged from their last moments before being killed by the mimic. Outside of the manor, you can also find an abandoned work van that is run down and destroyed. We can assume it belonged to one of the other teams that were sent to MCM, and this van serves as a small clue to their disappearances. So if Fazbear's Entertainment sent this many people but they all failed, then I think we can assume at one point William would just go himself to finally retrieve the mimic schematics. If William Afton was really an MCM, and trust me, I know that's a big if, what else did he see? Well, I think he probably saw the bodies stuffed inside of mascots. They were everywhere, and maybe he even saw the abandoned work van outside. And I'm sure when many of you saw these bodies, you would think back to the MCI. But wait, this was well before the missing children incident, as this game takes place in 1979, while the missing children incident is believed to happen at the earliest in 1983, 4 years after the events of this game. Well, we know the mimic most likely learned this from David, as in the books, which I know probably aren't canon, but I think we can still use them as supporting evidence. David and the mimic were dressed up in mascot suits from Edwin's workshop. He could have also learned this from the performers using the mascots, as in one of David's drawings, we see the elephant mascot suit attending his birthday party, which was probably just one of Edwin's employees. This could mean that William mimicked the mimic years later with the missing children incident, and not the other way around like we all suspected for years. The most infamous event from the franchise was inspired by an endoskeleton, and maybe these bodies were also where William learned of Remnant. Remnant is described as a type of energy substance infused with the souls and memories of those who possess the animatronics. William could have been inspired by these bodies that at this point were possessing the mascots. As a fellow theorist, Logan Entertainment pointed out in a video on the blob, when you first encounter the mimic in the elephant suit and near the crate where he escapes from, you find an incomplete head of an elephant suit. Taking a closer look at the head, there appears to be a small light source, and on rare occasions the light source within the head glows very bright and clearly looks possessed. We can even compare this mask to the bad ending of FNAF 3, where we see the main animatronics alongside Golden Freddy having their mascots lit up by a bright light source, meaning they are still possessed. So what if this light source came from one of the dead technicians trying to possess the elephant head, trying to get Arnold's attention? Which to me could prove that their souls are still lingering around MCM, which William Afton would also take note of, and would begin to learn of Remnant. And like I said earlier, if he truly wanted to learn about Remnant and possession, then why not experiment on the same land that he discovered it on? I already made a video covering how William Afton took over Edwin's entire life, and this even includes his mansion and home. In the parachute ending, which is widely regarded as canon, we actually see the mansion being burnt down after escaping the mimic. So what if after this fire, William would save what was left of the mansion and remodeled it to the FNAF warehouse we all know and remember? During the good ending, where Arnold is able to reset the mimic's programming to mimic David by playing him a bedtime story, we get a glimpse of David's room. And of course, this room is almost identical to the main room from FNAF 4 where all of the nights take place. They share a similar blue carpet, cabinets, and even patterns on the wall. And the closets where the Mimic and Foxy would come out of are almost identical, and most importantly, they both share the exact same toys. Toys that we've only ever seen in the FNAF 4 house that are once again returning in David's room. This just can't be a coincidence, and I think it's to tell us that they are the same. So after the MCM fire, William would fix what's left of the mansion and would create it into a similar house with the same toys and style of room. But why? Why fix Edwin's mansion? Well, I believe it was for his experiments, a room dedicated to William's test subjects with the nightmare animatronics. We can assume that the FNAF 4 house and the house shown in the minigames for this game are not the same. Here the house is in front of a playground and is in front of some road. There is also a sidewalk connecting it to Freddy's family diner where the bite of 83 took place. So lining this house up with everything we know about the FNAF 4 house and even the house from Midnight Motorist, there are just simply no similarities. This house isn't on a hillside surrounded by a forest, and it is connected to a pizzeria, unlike the house from the Dreadbird DLC and from Secret of the Mimic. So William would have his real house near Freddy's family diner where the FNAF 4 minigames took place, and after Secret of the Mimic, he would have a secret house dedicated to his experiments that no one would know about. This could also be why none of the rooms from the minigames match up with the rooms from the actual nights, and we learn about William's experiments from the tales from the pizzaplex novels. Like I said earlier, I know they've basically been proven to not be canon with new evidence from Secret of the Mimic, but we can still use them to help us prove claims like with Titophobia. Here the story focuses on a boy named Rory who is facing real-like nightmares of the nightmare animatronics from FNAF 4. He's repeating the same night before realizing the house he's in isn't even real and is able to escape through a vent. There he finds gas tanks of hallucinatory gas that was making him see the nightmare animatronics, but reality they were just mannequins on rails that would activate each single night. But he then finds himself in an underground bunker which is none other than Circus Baby's entertainment and rental, as he finds rooms from Sister Location and even the Funtime animatronics. So based on the story, it appears that William Afton has been experimenting on children in this fake house built on top of the Sister Location bunker. The nightmares are just hallucinations that would come from the gas from the underground bunker. Meaning, if we follow the same logic with this house from Secret of the Mimic that would eventually become the FNAF 4 house, the underground tunnels connecting the house to MCM would eventually become the Sister Location bunker. Meaning, after the fire, not only did William remodel Edwin's mansion to the FNAF 4 house, but he would also remodel the underground area into the Sister Location bunker that would eventually become Circus Baby's entertainment and rental with the Funtime animatronics. We can even find tanks of some sort of gas in one of the cameras in the bunker. And of course, we can also find the cameras inside the FNAF 4 house where William would most likely watch his experiments take place. But back to a point earlier, if this was William the entire time in MCM with us, it could mean that he's the one who ends up finding the Mimic and taking it for himself. In the parachute ending, we see the Mimic take Arnold's data driver before walking towards the forest. Now he could be going back to MCM, which he most likely sees as his home, or he's just wandering into the forest, so what happens to him is completely unknown. Maybe William would have found him walking along the road or found him going back to MCM, since William would also probably want to get away from the fire. He could then find a way to disable the Mimic and to then take the endoskeleton itself rather than the schematics. Or if you want to argue that the moon.exe ending is canon, after Arnold resets its programming, we have no idea what happened to the fixed Mimic. But if William was stalking us around MCM, he probably followed us to Edwin's mansion as well, where he would walk into the Mimic sleeping and Arnold just sitting there. If we were to predict what happened, he probably fired or even murdered Arnold while he took the Mimic for himself. Because his programming was already fixed and no longer a threat, this would be extremely easy unlike the parachute ending where we have no idea how William would apprehend him. So saying that William was in possession of the Mimic since what was before the first game in the FNAF timeline, what could this mean for the lore? Well, for one, it could explain the almost futuristic technology we see with the Funtime animatronics. When looking at Funtime Freddy's blueprints, he has the ability to voice Mimic and to lure, the same way the Mimic does. Did William Afton copy the Mimic's technology onto the Funtimes? He could keep learning from it, which was even the reason Fazbear's Entertainment were so desperate to get their hands on its schematics. If you really want to get crazy with possibilities or theories, the Mimic could be mimicking and replacing any human character we know of. In the Sister Location bunker, we saw human-like robot heads that were immediately connected to the crying child or Gregory being a robot. So using the same logic here, William could program the Mimic to mimic the crying child, Elizabeth, or even Michael Afton. Then he would just slap some flesh on them, and before you know it, they've been the Mimic this entire time. Taking it a step further, we can say the Mimic was Shadow Freddy in the FNAF 3 minigames. Simply because in FNAF 3, Shadow Freddy also mimics William Afton. In the minigames between each night, we see Shadow Freddy lure the 4 different animatronics into a room where William Afton dismantles them, the same way William Afton lured 5 children into a room and murdered them. William Afton is using Shadow Freddy to mimic his same actions, so what if Shadow Freddy was actually the Mimic or at least somehow connected to him? You may argue that Shadow Freddy is a hallucination and isn't real, as he's most like an agony or remnant manifestation. Well, what if Shadow Freddy is also a physical animatronic and not made of pure remnant? If he were a physical animatronic, that's why he looks like he's actually there, and that's why in FNAF 3 he seems real when the other animatronics follow him. They're not seeing some remnant illusion, but they're seeing a real animatronic leading them somewhere. And if he is real, how did William control an empty suit? Well, what if he didn't? What if it was the Mimic under the Shadow Freddy suit? If William were to lure the animatronics on his own, we can assume it wouldn't work, since the animatronics only respond to other suits. But since he shoved the Mimic into the Shadow Freddy suit, they would follow him and they would respond to him, as he would no longer just be an endoskeleton. And all of this would only be possible because he took control of the endoskeleton years earlier. However, I want to make it as clear as possible that this is just a thought to mess around with. So how does any of this fix the timeline? Well, I believe it tells us that William knew of Remnant since 1979 and that his experiments in the FNAF 4 house and the Sister Location bunker started around the same time, probably around 1983 and still before the missing children incident. And finding these bodies inside mascot suits can also maybe tell us about his motivations. The MCI wasn't some crazy and evil event because one of his children died, but it was a cold and calculated event to learn more about Remnant. I know this is also theorized to be the motives behind the FNAF 3 minigames. William is returning to this pizzeria to dismantle these animatronics, extract the Remnant, and use it for his Funtime animatronics. If this were to be the case, how did William know Remnant were in these animatronics and that it could be transferred to other animatronics? Well, now we can say he learned it from events in Secret of the Mimic. I also think having a clear idea of his motives can help us when deciding dates in the timeline. Because Remnant was something he knew of so early on, this could put events in the franchise earlier in the timeline, like with the MCI happening in 1983, and other deaths happening later in the timeline like Charlie Emily dying in 1987. But these are just ideas because I know how controversial these topics can be. This could also tell us that the scooper from Sister Location was made around this time as well, and maybe even before the MCI. Based on the scooper blueprints, which actually stand for Scalable Creation of Ulterior Presence, we know it was designed as a Remnant injector and as a Remnant reservoir, which is most likely how William injected Remnant into the Funtimes, if this is the case, and how Michael survived after being scooped. Instead of this being something that was created much later on in the timeline, it's always been there and could have maybe been used anywhere else we're not aware of. Of course, we can even tie this back to FNAF's infamous theory revolving around Circus Baby. With this theory, he brings up how the Immortal and the Relentless is a parallel to Edwin's story from the books, who had a mansion that was burnt in a fire. But now we can directly tie this to the events of Secret of the Mimic, where Edwin does exist as a character and his mansion is burnt in a fire, just like in the TV show. Then in Sister Location, we saw this chip being taken out of Circus Baby that Michael places on Hand Unit so Circus Baby can communicate with him. Now it's this small chip that is theorized to be the Mimic chip or a copy of his code. We then saw a similar chip being inserted into Helpy in FNAF Help Wanted 2, which would create a branch of the Mimic code making Helpy the Mimic as well. A well-known theory already. In this same level, we find a drawing of Helpy escaping a burning building, a parallel to the chip escaping the Freddy Fazbear Pizzeria Simulator fire. The chip just also happens to glow green like Glitch Trap. Circus Baby is described as being able to quote-unquote pretend, which could be referring to what the Mimic can do. And Baby is able to change voices when she takes on the form of Ennard. So taking in all this information with the context of what I just discussed, it would honestly make perfect sense. William was already in possession of the Mimic for years by this point, so he was the one who added the Mimic chip to Circus Baby, even giving her the ability to mimic voices. I also want to bring up that Dispatch from Secret of the Mimic and Hand Unit from Sister Location share the exact same voice. We know Dispatch turns out to be M1 or F10N4, so because it's the same voice as Hand Unit, this could be telling us that these Mimic chips can store different voices, as Hand Unit even gives us options to what voice we want to hear.
Using the keypad below, please select a new companion voice. For male, press 1. For female, press 2. For text only, press 3. For other options, press 4. It seems that you had some trouble with the keypad. I see what you were trying to type, and I will autocorrect it for you. Thank you for choosing Angsty Teen.
So, funny story? A dead body was found in this vent once? Okay, so not that funny, but it's a story.
It's even being theorized that these other voices like the Angsty Teen were a part of Team 12 that were first sent to retrieve the Mimic that I mentioned earlier, as the Mimic chip would copy these voices and store them to use later. So Hand Unit could directly be M1 or it's a branch of the Mimic code, but either way it feels that these similarities are intentional, and it also seems that FNAF was right all along. But again, all of this would only really be possible if the silhouette from Secret of the Mimic is indeed William. But there is also a big gap in the timeline where we have no idea what happened to the Mimic. We all know after William was spring-locked, he was trapped in this room for decades, so where was the Mimic for more than 30 years till we saw him again in ruin? Well, I see two different options. One, the Mimic was being held in the bunker and escaped with the rest of the Funtimes when the time came, or you could take it as far to say that he was one of the Funtimes. But the option I believe in the most, which is something I kinda already discussed, is that the Mimic would return to his home or to Murray's costume manor. Whether that be that the Mimic just wandered off after William disappeared, or that he was always trying to return, the Mimic returning to MCM could set up his role in ruin. It's well believed now that the pizzaplex was built over MCM, so if the Mimic did return, he would be stationary for years until someone would find him around the time the pizzaplex was being built. Then he roams around the pizzaplex, murders people here and there before being trapped back in MCM by presumably Gregory and Vanessa. Now earlier I said I don't think it's Edwin, and that's still something I firmly believe in, because I don't think he would be stalking us. By this point Edwin already knows just how dangerous the Mimic really is after he was attacked by him, severely injuring his legs in the process.
I can't move.
can't feel my legs.
You know, speaking of legs, what do you think? I just finished mine. There are still a few kinks to work out.
I'm sorry, I lost my temper. I was always gonna fix you. Please, call for help. And two, respond.
So why wouldn't Edwin want to step in to try and save Arnold from the Mimic or to try and even stop the Mimic himself? I honestly don't see the reason for Edwin to be back in MCM stalking us unless he would want to step in or stop the Mimic. Now I do still definitely think he's alive, especially since in the Tales novels he has a pretty significant role with the pizzaplex. So I do think he's out there somewhere, and there's even a chance we'll see him in a future project. Future Bronze here one last time. Now there isn't much to add to this theory because most of it is based on what ifs and speculations, so instead I want to make some clarifications. If it felt like I was just throwing ideas at the end, that's cause I was. Ideas like the Mimic being Shadow Freddy don't have too much evidence, which is why I just included it at the end for something to think about. So I apologize if I felt like the ending was rushed, but there truthfully wasn't more to add to it. So please comment down below any thoughts and how I can continue to improve these videos. So with that said, I hope you guys enjoyed this video where we attempt to solve William Afton. Now so far I think we did a great job with the theory I'm the most proud in being WillCade. So what do you guys think? Make sure to comment down below any thoughts or theories and if we really solved this infamous character. And don't forget to use code BRONZEFILMED when checking out any G Fuel products, and thank you all for the support. So please consider hitting that like and subscribe button, and thank you all so much for watching.